Tom Goss and David Bogert at SoccerWise talking DC United. Yes, I got you, Tom. We are doing 30 season previews for all 30 teams at MLS. I have started most of them the same. I wanted to see if I could get Tom on that one, and I did. What do you like better? Do you like Tom Goss or do you like David Bogert?
Ooh, I like them both, and I think that was smart because that could have been a trap if I just nodded my head along like absent-mindedly, and like you would have been like, oh, you haven't listened to anything I've said this entire time. So good one. I was on my toes. I was ready. I don't know which of those I prefer. I like them both.
Yeah, I think we could just go Goss Scoops in the end. And just have that be this
I like
fake
that.
personality. I'll create this Frankenstein monster of soccer.
Sounds like Mediterranean
mustaches. Food. Yeah, exactly. We'll just have a full sandwich with mozz, prosciutto, all that. We'll throw the hummus on top, and then we'll just see how it all fits together, and we'll see how it all works. We've got our DC United preview coming up in a moment with Gregory Roach of Pitch Pass. Does a great job covering DC United, very passionate about the lower levels of things, youth ranks, all that type of stuff I'm passionate about as well. So we had a really fun conversation that time you weren't there to join us for, because this is a team, they're not in your sphere right now. Like, they're not doing much. It has been an odd offseason for DC United.
Yeah, odd is probably a good way to put it. That seems to fit DC United just in general, kind of when in doubt. I do like what Ali McKay in this front office is doing. They want to be younger. They want to be a transition, pressing, energetic-based team with Christian Benteke up top. So that's how they differentiate themselves from the other high-pressing transition teams that are in MLS, because they have a singular force of nature that is unlike anything else we've seen in this league. Again, my favorite stat in MLS last year was Christian Benteke's aerial dominance and how far ahead of literally everybody else he was in aerial duels won. He was ahead of several teams on their own, like completely on his own. He is a wonderful player, and just talking about his forehead undersells his excellent technique, his excellent intelligence. This is one of my favorite players to watch. And even if you don't love the style, even if they don't kind of climb up the table, so they're not super relevant in terms of like the trophy chases, I'm always going to watch this team because, god damn it, I love watching Christian Benteke.
He was at media marketing, and he did confirm Don Badji's story that he brought some players to Miami to celebrate his golden boot. Anyone on DC that wanted to. Then the Miami media got super excited. They're like, "Where'd you go? What'd you do?" And Christian Benteke's like, "Do not ask me those questions. I'm not telling you specifically what I do in Miami." And you're like, "Guy knows. That guy. That's a guy who's been in World Cups. That guy knows the highest level. He knows the elite setup." I'm hopeful for this year for DC United. I think I said in the show, like, if you come out of 25 knowing that there's a clear plan going forward, that's probably best case scenario. But when you go back, and this is a show here at SoccerWise where we cover MLS and WSL equally, you go back and you look at what Washington Spirit playoff games looked like last year, sold out Addy Field, absolutely bumping. That has to be the goal for this club. You have to get there. DC is one of the great soccer markets, both for players and fans in the world, with, the international setup inside the city and people coming from all different backgrounds that love the game and celebrate it in different ways. And we've seen that in the supporters culture for DC United, right? To have such a South American style supporters culture, but also have sprinklings in from Western Europe and Eastern Europe and West Africa and all the different areas that love the game. Like, DC should be one of the great spots. And so the hope is we are very early on that road, and I talked about it with Gregory as well. Well, let's go now to our nation's capital, of course, and we are going to be talking about one of the originals, one of the big names in Major League Soccer, DC United, although it hasn't felt the same maybe over the last few years. And we've got our local expert here in Gregory Roach, host of the Pitch Pass podcast. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts if you're listening here on SoccerWise. If the other way around, welcome to SoccerWise. We stream live twice a week covering MLS. We cover NWSL as well, all your Washington Spirit coverage, if that is what you are looking for. And Gregory, first time together, but I'm excited to do it.
David, I'm a big fan, man. And as somebody who really embraces the youth and the academy culture of the sport, I just really appreciate all the work you do. And if people don't know, if you watch the Apple broadcast of all the youth tournaments that they play, GA Cup, the playoffs, David is usually the guy doing the call. So I really appreciate all the work you've done with the youth of the United States.
I appreciate that as well. My friend would like me to add, and Canada. I literally got a text 10 minutes ago saying, can you tell me about this U15 TFC player a little more? So it's everywhere that I can find it, but I appreciate that as well. It is something that I have brought up over and over again with DC United because it should be a strength of DC. We're going to get into that as we get into the show because it's something I've been hopeful about as we've had new changes in management over the last few years of trying to key in on that. The DMV is one of, if not the soccer hotbeds in North America, as it should be. And it's been really fun to watch the talent in that area. Unfortunately, I've watched the talent on a lot of other academy teams and on a lot of other professional teams as the years have gone along. What we like to do here is we start with our transfer update to get everyone sort of an idea of what's been going on for the last few weeks/months. Then we will dig into our Matt Doyleism. He has recorded his sage words, which are sometimes fun and sometimes a bit of a downer. And you can guess, I think, which way it's going to go today, but we'll see how much truth we find in it. And then we will finish with our line, our over-under line that is set by Mr. Andrew Wiebe, who has taken on the soul of a New Jersey bookie as he lives in northern New Jersey over the last few years. Let's start on the transfers. And Gregory, it's always one, where do we set it? What's the big story, in or out? And I think for me, it felt for DC United this offseason, it was the outbounds. It was a lot of big contracts, and some of them, many of them, good to see them finally come to their end and leave. Some of those names, Alex Bono, Dahome, Martin Rodriguez, Pedro Santos, Chris McVie, and then a few surprising moves, I think, as well. The big one being Matty Click, the designated player traded to Atlanta, but still holding a DP spot on the DC roster. And then the bombshell last week that Ted DiPietro would be sold inside the league, one of the first, I'm trying to call Cades, maybe cash first, for over $1 million inside of Major League Soccer to the Colorado Rapids off the back of Matej Akinbomi being sold to Bournemouth earlier this year. What have you made of this window? What's sort of been the experience watching each piece of news come out as DC has gone on this offseason?
There's always a but with DC United, and that's the case. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. It is the outbound transfers are the story of this offseason. We knew going into last season that Troy and Ali, Troy Lesane, head coach, Ali Mackay, the GM, they were going to have a big job to do to kind of tear down all of the bad contracts that they had acquired when they took these positions. They said, give us this year, which was last year, and then we'll start the rebuild in this offseason. They were very quick to do it, and that was kind of fun and exciting as a DC United fan. Usually they wait till the actual last possible second. They got a lot of their business done in December. And as you said, got rid of a lot of those contracts that weren't necessarily bad players, but were bad contracts.
Right.
And that was exciting. And we saw that as fans of, okay, now it's starting. And then it kind of stopped. And then, as you mentioned, the Matty Click deal was the one that kind of made the tail kind of turn, where the supporters went from, this is really cool, we're breaking it all down, we're going to add all these pieces, we've got money now to spend. And then that Click deal comes through, and I don't know if you want to get into it now, but it's a very strange deal, and it's one that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's one that leaves ultimately a sour taste in the mouths of DC United supporters because he's off the roster. The DP slot is still DC United's, and for all intents and purposes, they're paying $2 million of his $2.2 million contract for him to play for Atlanta. And that's really where it kind of, I don't want to say it went badly, but that's where it kind of soured as far as the excitement for the season came.
Yeah, I think when you normally see a deal like this in Major League Soccer, there is the opposite version, which is we're going to let someone rent our DP spot for them, aka what Atlanta could have done if they had brought him in on a DP deal. It's something that we've sort of are seeing Montreal do with the New England Revolution. Or you look at things and say that this personality is one that we can't have around the club. No matter what, we have to get them out. That wasn't the feeling from what I've heard, and even talking to the Atlanta people now, they said he's very quiet. You know, he sounds like he wants to go back to Poland eventually, but he's going to play out his contract. I guess that's the confusion around some of this is it didn't feel like a drastic need. And so to send him to an Eastern Conference rival to give them a good deal felt very extra, on top of just saying, yeah, we have to play out this deal one more year. The rebuild doesn't fully start until it's over.
Here's and this is always with DC United. Yes, you could say all that. You could also say, if you're Troy and Allie, you know what? We want to go with players that we are brought in.
Mm-hmm.
We want young players, young legs. It's a very high energy system that Troy wants to play. Maybe a 35-year-old isn't the best fit for that. Okay, great. We want to establish a locker room presence. Click was a really good locker room presence, but he is a veteran locker room presence. Maybe they just thought to themselves, we want to establish a new kind of presence and a new kind of culture. The other side of the coin is, they had a second buyout that they could have used. They used the first buyout, and if you're not a DC United fan, you're going to scratch your head over a lot of this conversation. But they had to buy out Steve Birnbaum's contract, even though Steve Birnbaum retired mid-season. And as I've said in many of my podcasts on Pitch Pass, this is the only American sport where I feel like usually when somebody has to retire, an insurance company flies in and goes, we'll pay the rest of that deal.
Yeah.
To get it all. That didn't happen in MLS, so they had to buy out Steve Birnbaum even though he retired.
I believe he's now been hired as a coach, is my understanding, with the club.
He's the technical director of DC Power, which is the other women's league in the United States, the only city that has two teams, one in NWSL and one in this USL team, is DC, and DC United owns DC Power. So he still works for the club. Again, is always complicated with DC United. Really, at the end of the day, the owner didn't sign off on buying out Click's contract, and this is what Allie decided was the best way to get out from under it and also to reestablish the culture, to jettison a player, pay most of their contract, and carry the DP slot all year. So DC, in essence, will be playing with the 2 DP 4 U22 system, but only 1 DP in Christian Benteke, because the other DP slot for this year will be filled with Click.
And I guess the last piece of it, as you said, there's always more, is you just would have thought a guy who's got 50 caps for Poland, played with his career, there would be someone overseas where you'd say, we'll carry the contract. Will you let him play for you for whatever it is? If it's a half year, you refigure it out in the summer, to send him to an Eastern Conference opponent. And you could argue how much of an opponent it is with what we think the standings will end up being over the course of the year. That's the part that's just really odd on top of it, of like, yeah, you want to reset the midfield. You want the young guys to have a chance. We'll talk about those young guys. I think that's part of the excitement around this club. You want to have new leaders step in, and it's going to be hard to do it with a guy of that veteran experience in there. All of that is fine, but to end up by the deal ending up being, hey, Chris Henderson, hey, Garth Lagerwey, you guys are about to spend a historic amount of transfer money. Also, would you like a free DP? Has been very puzzling. I think it is something that's actually going to hurt other fans more than DC fans. I think Orlando fans and Miami fans and Cincinnati fans might be more pissed about this than DC United fans end up being. Let's talk about the incoming, though.
Yeah.
Before we get into our Doyleisms, the big change has been the goalkeeper room. It is going to be a new starting goalkeeper. I mentioned Bono being on the way out. Luis Barraza was brought in inside of Major League Soccer, and then Kim Jun-hong was brought in, a young South Korean goalkeeper. We've rarely seen goalkeeper signings at this age internationally in Major League Soccer, but it's one they have clearly been committed to for a while. Like, we heard about this one as the whole offseason went along. That is part of the rebuild. In the back, Kyle Rolls brought in, got his first start, I believe, last week in preseason. 26-year-old Australian center back coming from Hearts in Scotland. A few MLS vets, Randall Leal and Lucas McNaughton, who we could see in that center back role as well. And then a bit of an unknown in a Brazilian attacker, Joao Peglo, brought in from Poland, 23 years old, to play across the attacking front three, whatever it ends up being. And then the last name I'll throw in here is David Schnegg, who we saw come last year, be injured, play Leagues Cup, get injured, only ended up making 2 MLS appearances. The expectation was, though, he would be the starting left wing back. So that's your pieces brought in. Gregory, what do you make of especially this goalkeeper move?
So this will be the theme as far as all of the incoming players. It's exciting on paper until you then look at what the rest of the league did and you go, oh, yeah, okay. Like, Kojima is probably going to be, and I think that was Doyle's breakout candidate for DC United was Kojima, who they got from St. Louis, who fits this system perfectly. But you just don't know because he hasn't done it anywhere, let alone in MLS. I think with June, the South Korean goalkeeper, it's exciting. He's got caps for the national team at a very young age. He's come in. His English is actually pretty good. He did a kind of walk and talk on their Instagram in English, which was like, wow, this guy just got here and he's already picked up enough language to be comfortable doing this in English. He seems like an exciting player. We just don't know. And you could say that about Kojima. You could say that about Peglo. You could say that about a lot of the guys that they brought in. Is this all feels like it could be great, but it also feels like it's a lot of what ifs. And if this hits, then. And for a team that needed a lot of juice going into the season, that's not creating it. It created the juice in December, and then we started seeing what everybody else was bringing in, and you're like, yeah, okay, our juice doesn't feel as cold as that juice.
That is some is from concentrate and some is fresh squeezed. And the fresh squeezed stuff with the pulp is what you really want to be spending that money on.
And it's refreshing, and this isn't refreshing. Although here's what I will say, David. The difference between past regimes and this regime, they got their work done early. You look at how and you use June as the example, and I'll use him as the example as well. They eyeballed him, they recruited him, they went and got him, and they got him signed early. This wasn't a case of, wait, Wayne Rooney wants Ravel Morrison, sign him to $1 million contract. It doesn't feel like just throwing slop against a wall and hoping it sticks. This feels like we wanted Kojima, we wanted June, we wanted Peglo, and they went through the proper steps, and you can find, like, just them getting their visas to be able to come in and practice immediately just shows the difference between past regimes and this regimes, that these are the players they wanted. Whether they're good or not, we're going to have to see. But these are the players they wanted, and they got them.
And they all fit the same timeline. It's not for 2025. They are young pieces that you're hoping to develop. If you are looking at things and saying the rebuild is a 2-year rebuild at a minimum, and we are already a step behind because we're paying a DP to not play for our club, get young players, especially in positions like center back and goalkeeper and that, get them minutes, get them experience, give them opportunities. And then in central midfield as well, with the pieces they've brought in, the long-term contracts that a Patola and an E now are on. Let's talk about the coach before we jump into Doyle's comments. As a reminder, only U.S. Open Cup for DC United. They didn't qualify for playoffs, so no CONCACAF Champions Cup and no Leagues Cup because of that, which I have done a couple of these on some teams that are in that scenario, and you start to look at it and say, whoa, that's like a real chance. That's 4 or 5 wins away from a semifinal, from a potential CONCACAF Champions Cup, from potentially hosting a final for a club that didn't make the playoffs last year. Like, that is something they have to take seriously. DC has not done that well over the last 10 years as we've seen it break up.
Here's what I'll say to that, David, as well, though. For a team that wants to play a high-energy style, those lack of games, those lack of tournaments could be an advantage where they will have fresher legs than, say, Miami's 30-somethings come August. Now, whether that will mean anything as far as the talent deficit is concerned, probably not, but it is something to look out for, that this team won't be overstuffed with matches this season.
Let's talk about the style. Let's talk about Troy Lesesne. Not his first year, but it was his first year last year as a full-time head coach. He is, I think, one of, if not the biggest stories with this club, maybe outside of Christian Benteke. The style is important. The cohesion, the individual improvement. Like, if this team is going to contend this year, it's going to be because it all clicked under Troy Lesesne. What have you made of him as a manager, as a person, as a personality so far? What's the feeling around DC United fans?
Benteke is the star. Absolutely. Ali, Mackay, Troy Lesesne, they're the ones that I hope that fans are betting on, because they're the ones that are going to be establishing the culture. And I think that's the best thing you could say about Troy Lesesne for year one, was everybody bought into the culture. And the guys who didn't and maybe weren't on big salaries are no longer with the club. So this is Troy Lesesne's team. And by that, I mean, yes, he is the coach, but these are all people who have bought in on the style of play that he wants. Now, the question is, we didn't really get a really crystal clear idea of what Troy Lesesne's style of play is in 2023 because of all the things we said. The contracts that he didn't bring in, the players that he didn't have, the talent that the way that he wanted to play, these guys weren't suited for. So that'll be the thing that I'm looking forward to this year, and I'll keep an eye on, is What are his preferred tactics? How does he prefer to play? Yes, we know it's high energy. Yes, we know it's pressing. But what are the nuances that this coach is going to bring in that's going to separate them from, say, classic Red Bull soccer or the way the Union are going to play? That's what we'll be looking at, and that'll be one of the most important things for United, not just for this year, but for moving forward for this club.
Yeah, it feels like this year has to finish with an excitement that Troy Lesesne has a finger on the pulse of what this group can be and how it can step forward. And if that's the case, that could be a good year for DC United. Let's go to our Doyleism now and listen, and then we'll talk a little bit about it off the back end.
I think if we were to poll folks around the league right now, DC United would stand a pretty good chance of being the wooden spoon favorites. Um, there's just not a lot of obvious plus starters in this group. Christian Benteke up top is one, very obviously. The other one is Aaron Herrera at right wing back. That's assuming they play the 3-4-2-1. But other than that, David Schnegg, is he going to hit Boris Eno? Are he and Matty Peltola or maybe Jose Kojima? Is that going to be a particularly good central midfield? Jared Stroud and Gabriel Pirani as your attacking midfielders. Um, this does not look like a team that is set up to improve upon last year, which, I mean, last year wasn't great, but had some pretty great moments, and they were in the playoff hunt right into the last couple of weeks of the season. If anything, to me, it looks like a worse collection of talent with a lot of holes. Now, they did go out and add some, uh, you know, some depth, I guess, and maybe even a couple of starters on the back line at center back. Kojima does have some stuff in terms of his pressing, like he's really good in changing phases of play, which creates turnovers, and we all know that that's part of what Troy Lesesne wants from his team. I mean, it's the biggest thing that he wants from his team, but it looks to me like it's going to be a massive talent gap every single week. And that's not a great recipe for success in any league.
All right, DC fans, take a breath. Let's relax for a moment.
This is our lives, David. We don't need to take a breath. This is our lives.
Let's start to dig in. It's the big question he brings up is that talent gap, and you mentioned it. Will energy, will style, will focus be able to overcome that talent gap? Now, we have seen this style work for teams, right? We've seen Philadelphia for years, and sometimes they did have the talent, and other times they didn't overcome some of those gaps. Red Bulls have leaned on this. It worked for St. Louis 2 years ago, and you see a lot of those pieces now being brought in the Strouds and Kojimas as well. Very rarely does that team have a golden boot winner on their roster as well. So there is that real option of there are games that DC United will have the best player on the field. That's not something you say about a team that you think is threatening to be a wooden spoon. I think that's some of the dichotomy you have to deal with a little bit with this DC United roster.
I think, and I really, like, it hurt me to hear Doyle speak that way because unlike, a lot of local fans who think the national writers hate their team no matter what the sport, I always feel like historically Doyle has been a little more bullish on DC United than they probably deserved. So the fact that even Mr. Bullish is like, I'm not really sure, it makes me nervous. But here's what I'll say. I don't agree with him that they are wooden spoon candidates. Maybe they're side-eyeing the wooden spoon. Yeah. But I just think that they're the style of play, and then you look at other teams. I'm thinking about Nashville, Philly is going to be way off. I just don't think that they're going to be at the very bottom. Do I think they'll be middle bottom? Yes, I do. But I don't think they're going to be middle at the bottom because of, number one, the culture, and number two, the fact that they're bought in. And yes, the talent deficit will probably prevent them from being a playoff team. But I don't think it will allow them to bottom out to that point. I just think that they're going to will their way to enough wins to not be in that wooden spoon conversation. And then, as you said, Benteke, if he has a 15-goal season, that's going to cover up a lot of the cracks that would show with a team without a Benteke.
Yeah, it's one of those players, one where the service will come because you're going to get set pieces, you're going to get corners, all those things. So for a team that maybe can struggle in chance creation, he will still get his looks and
Right.
get his chances. I agree with you on the wooden spoon side of normally the team that ends up winning that is one where the floor fell out on them unexpectedly, and everyone looks around in July and August and is like, I'm not really here anymore. I don't need this.
Right.
That doesn't feel the case with DC, one, because I think they're going in with a little bit clear eyes, and two, you got a lot of players here who have a huge chance.
Correct.
These are players that don't get to start or aren't guaranteed minutes. And I think Troy Lesesne, with his background in Charleston and New Mexico and what I saw with the Red Bulls a little bit closer as I covered Red Bulls too, is I think he's someone that can connect to those types of players and say, like, I believe in you. And that is, that's what a player like a Jared Stroud spends their whole career looking for, is for a coach to turn to them and say that. And the gap in talent is not that large in Major League Soccer where that doesn't matter. And so if you are cohesive, and I think that's the other piece of this whole thing, year two, a lot of these pieces playing together. I think the goalkeeper conversation is one in which now these players' talent styles fits for DC United. Luis Barraza, for all the difficulties he had at times at NYCFC, is one of the best goalkeepers with his feet in Major League Soccer. And he wants to play off his line. He wants to be connected to the back line, and you assume that's the same bringing in an international goalkeeper to fit this system. So now as it starts to become more cohesive, as well as pieces can start to anticipate what's happening because they've been around it for a year in, the Lucas Bartlett's of the world, in the Aaron Herrera's of the world, the Matty Patolas, can everything, if it's all on the right page, work quickly? And I think that's the hope, is that can sort of overcome some of that talent deficit, and then you have some talent that is good enough in the players he talked about. Aaron Herrera, arguably the best at his position in Major League Soccer, and Benteke as well.
And I'm going to say this. I've said it on my podcast, Pitch Pass, and for me, the glimpses that I saw of David Schnegg last year, I am expecting a left-sided Aaron Herrera. So if you're high on Aaron Herrera as an outside back, I think you're going to get the same thing on the left side. They're very similar player profiles. They run all day. They have really good height for their positions. They like to get up into the attack. So I think if you have now somebody on the other side of the pitch that's doing the same thing as Aaron Herrera, and the thing about Christian Benteke is he needs service, and I think this style, this pressing style, you're going to get turnovers in like the middle of the pitch, and then you're going to get a little bit of a break the other way, and that's when Benteke can shine, and he doesn't have to chance create. I think this pressing system will create those chances. And I think the other point, which I really love that you made, was there is everybody is either, other than Benteke, either in their prime or young and entering their prime. They've got a lot to play for no matter what this team does, and they've got a lot to put themselves in the shop window for. And I think while they didn't bring any even B-plus level starters in theory, I think they have a lot of B-minus players, including their subs. So I think, I don't think they brought in high-level starters, but I think they brought in a lot of guys who are on that borderline of starter and reserve. So if that first wave, whoever gets the first crack at the midfield doesn't show, the guys behind them, it's not a big drop-off from them to the next person, which I think makes their floor kind of more solid than a usual crappy team. Not a high ceiling, but I think the floor is pretty solid.
Yeah, very often Major League Soccer is a weak link game. Who has the worst player on the field? Who makes the biggest mistake? That doesn't feel like this DC team, even though probably 2 through 8 on a lot of games might not be a DC player as well. Let's talk about one that we kind of glossed over because there's so much weird stuff going on with DC United, which is you mentioned players entering their prime. Teddy DiPietro is one of those players. He was given a big contract as a U22 initiative player. It's rare for an American or a domestic player to be brought back into a roster at one of those designations, but it's one of the reasons it was created, to keep players like that, maybe when they're looking at a European move, and then sold inside the league. I want to talk about young players inside DC after this, but what do you make of this move and the idea behind it for the club?
It's a very DC United move. They did something that was outside the box, sign an American player to a U22 contract. The reason they did it, maybe at the time they didn't want to pay an international player to come in. Who knows what the reason is, but they did it, and that's really great. And if that's what it was, you'd go, kudos to DC United. And then they promptly trade him 6 months later to Colorado for, again, not an insignificant amount, $1.25 million, and then a percentage of transfer. This was a good deal in the abstract. Now, this was a kid who paid his dues, who was not thought of as one of the stars of the academy, who just kept grinding, went to USL when the Loudoun United partnership was in place, proved himself there, had to work his way on the roster. So it's a really great local kid story that, as you said at the beginning, DC needs those local kid stories to kind of keep those local kids hungry to play for DC. I don't know if this was something that he asked for or the club looked at, but if you want to just analyze it from a soccer point of view, they had multiple guys at that position. They had Leal as a backup. They are putting a lot of chips on Pirani. This was a situation where they were dealing from a position of depth, and this was the most marketable asset that they had of these guys who are going to play underneath of Benteke. If Colorado's going to come along and give you $1 million plus, I said on Blue Sky, United sold Mattia Cambone for the same amount of money to Bournemouth that Colorado paid for Cu Pietro. Did you say the Akambone deal was bad? You did not. Now, if Ku comes out and balls out on Colorado, it's going to look bad. But the one thing is, he didn't have a good year last year. He has been prone to these little niggling injuries where you don't see him for 4 to 6 weeks. And then he comes back, and then he plays well, and he has all that swag and that sauce on the field. And you're like, I love this guy. And then he misses another 3 games. So it was a situation of how good he was. It really still, at the end of the day, was a little underwhelming as far as output is concerned.
Yeah, there are a lot of twists and turns to this. One being, this was a bigger deal than you would have thought they would get. If we were to have sat down in December and say, let's just say Ted Pietro gets sold this offseason, how much do you think it's for? I don't think there's a European team coming in to sign Ted Pietro at his age, 23 years old, so not like entering prime in European years, and the year he's had and the career he's had so far. And so the assumption, though, on the U22 deal for me was, so he's going to play his career on this deal. He's going to be around, and he's going to be, if he is starter level player, that's probably not a bad way to use that contract. I think you get into a spot with the Colorado deal comes along where you say, well, actually, now this could be a significant move for us. And you keep sell on. So he goes, he plays well, he gets moved. Maybe this becomes a $2-3 million move down the road. That's more than you would expect from Ted Pietro. So like you said, in abstract, on paper, all of that makes sense. But where you sit right now, you don't have high-level starters in the team, and you're not exciting your fan base. It's felt a little aggressive to make this move for the club, and it kind of comes out of nowhere unless he's pushing and asking for it, which would be odd off the back of signing the deal and saying, I'm going to be here, and you guys have shown this trust in me.
So here's the elephant in the room. They asked us last year, this is a project, be patient. We have a lot of bad contracts. We need to get through this season. We're going to clear those out, and then we're going to start the process. That happened. What this says, what the Click deal says, what the lack of bringing another DP because of the Click deal says is we need you to still be patient.
Right.
And that's the hard part. DC fans, DC United, the club, has been fumbling the ball for the past 15 years. I like that you start the intro, one of the most storied franchises, because that's what everybody says about DC United, one of the most storied franchises, because there's nothing to say about DC United post-2012, let's say, and that's even being generous. So they fumbled the ball for many, many years. Last year, they didn't say we're fumbling. They just said we're punting on this year. Okay, we'll give you another year as supporters. You're coming in again saying, hey, you know what? We're going to have to punt on this year as well. That's a tough pill for DC United fans to swallow, and that's what makes this – that's the cloud hanging over this entire conversation is I could be excited about this team, except I've got all this baggage from the last 20 years of being a DC United fan that I'm carrying with me into this season, and what I'm hearing from the club again is we got it this time. And while I do believe that Troy and Ali have it, I've been burned too many times from this club.
Yeah, I think that's a fair feeling, and I think coming off the Click deal – this deal following it makes it hard because it's like, okay, fine. An older player moved out. We have a new future, whatever. And then the younger player gets moved out and you're starting to grasp. But the reality of it is they look at things and say, we need that $1.5 million to rebuild this roster. And we're going to be better off. And I think it's fair, as you talked about his injury history, to say maybe we don't think that deal will be there in a year. I would argue that the number would have been close. Right? If he plays in Major League Soccer this year anywhere near what we think he is, my guess would be if you put him on the market for a cash transfer trade, whatever it was, that you're probably going to get $800,000 next year from an MLS team that's looking to fill one of those spots, and probably the Colorado Rapids. quite honestly, with the way they've built themselves. But I digress there. Let's hit this before we hit our over-under line. Is there any young pieces that you are excited about? I know you did a special on the academy players that have gone to preseason, and I think Travis Clark was on that one of the best covering the youth ranks. Is there pieces that do get you excited or ones that you're hoping to see a couple minutes of this year?
No. And the sad thing is, you said it at the top, this is a talent-rich area. I would say 90% of the clubs in MLS would kill to have this kind of talent in their backyard. And they haven't shown that they have a clear pipeline from those talented kids to the first team. And, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but they don't have an MLS Next Pro team. They're the only American MLS team that doesn't have an MLS Next Pro team, which means a lot of the kids that could be getting minutes against kind of pro-ish players aren't getting those minutes. So you have players like Gavin Turner, who just got back from overseas trialing with Crystal Palace, trialed with West Ham in the fall, just turned 18 years old. One of the bright stars of the academy and American soccer when he's healthy, still not signed, because he's forced to play on the U18 team because there's no next step from U18 to the first team. So I would love to tell you that there are guys that I think will get minutes, but the reality of the situation is I don't know who they're going to sign, and I don't know how the players that they sign are going to get minutes to work their way into the first team. There are a lot of players. I could give you 6 guys who I think could do a job on DC United this year. I don't think they will because I don't see a pathway for them to get minutes. Yeah, and not because of the talent.
Right. The pipeline is really the big question mark for most of these clubs. It's why the Galaxy were aggressive about building the 2-team for the first time, even though they've handled it somewhat poorly. It's what's been one of the successes for Philly, New York, and Dallas, is their ability to push a lot of young players into those 2 teams, get them into the system, get them understanding the physicality and the speed of play. I do value loans to USL teams because I think there's a life experience in that, but those are supposed to come when it's necessary for those pieces. Right. That should not be the only way to function. And it's one of the reasons I think you see players walk away, or even in a Christian Fletcher situation, not want to sign, finally sign, and then find a way to sort of get to another club that has a structure where they can move into a reserve team and get minutes and challenge themselves.
I think that's the problem too. Is Griffin Yow's another one. They sold him for $500,000, which is nothing, and he's balled out when he's not been injured.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is they have a sell-on fee for him. So if Westerlo decides to move on from him, they're going to get money from that. The Matai Akambone thing, the Christian Fletcher, he seems to be doing well right now for Nottingham Forest. They'll pay money for him. The Cudi Pietro. You can't say that they're not getting money from their academy. They're not maximizing.
Right. They're basically leasing out those years and that opportunity with those players to clubs who have the structure. It's something we've kind of seen Toronto do as well. And those are 2 teams we're talking about in the Spoon conversation, which is never good. I would like to throw a shout out in there for Garrison Tubbs, who's a player that I've loved at the academy ranks, but obviously because of the lack of the 2 team, you're talking about him and Jacob Murrell, who are both players that are through college or into college that are going to get maybe opportunities because they're further along, because you don't have that gap in the middle. Let's finish here with our line.
I think Merle specifically is somebody to keep an eye on. Jackson Hopkins would be another one, but he can't not be injured. Tubbs might not get a lot of minutes based on the way the center backs they brought in. But Merle did a job last year. Merle was very lively when he came in, and he was up for the transition from Georgetown to MLS. Yeah. And I think if you're looking for a young player to kind of pop that's not a name, that would be the guy. So good shout on Merle.
And I assume for DC fans, they know Georgetown, I think, plays the best soccer in college soccer. So it is one of the best places to come out of. Also, go watch a game if you're in the area as well. Let's finish on our line here. We could put Georgetown in this line. We'll see if they finish higher or lower. Andrew Wiebe set it as DC United 39.5 points in Major League Soccer this year, over or under. So the context. Last year, DC finished on 40 points exactly. It was tied with Atlanta United for 9th and then 10th, which was the play-in spot and the final spot in the playoffs. So that is the line that he's setting at. Basically, are they better or worse than they finished last year? The rest of the context is no team has made the playoffs in MLS since 2020, below 39 points. 2020, of course, the COVID season. So weird setup, weird points, all of that. So the question kind of here, is this a DC team that will contend for the playoffs or not? What do you make of the line and where do you fall?
Well, this is why I don't gamble, because I always go, oh, yeah, easy. And then I see the line and I go 39.5. That's exactly where I put it. I don't know what to say. So, yeah, I would say 39.5 is a really good number. Good job, Weeby. And I got to take – here's the thing. I'm going to take the over on the points, but not by much, like maybe 41. But I'm going to take the under on the position because I think some teams got ahead of them, and maybe a team or two – I'm thinking Philly specifically might fall below them. But a couple of the teams that – like Atlanta is not – if Atlanta's there competing with United again, a lot of things went wrong. So I think at the end of the day they're going to finish a little lower in the standings, but I think they're going to have maybe a higher point total, but only by 1.5 points.
Yeah, I'm kind of in line with you. I think they will be where they were last year. Right. I think they will be competitive, but the Revs have made 14 moves. That was a team that was below them. Nashville feels like they've solidified maybe. It's really DC and Toronto towards the bottom of the East for me that are obvious, but I think this is a DC team, as I said, that I think will work hard. They will be coherent. Right. They will try through an MLS season, which is a long season that some teams don't. And so I think we will see in the end that it's a DC team that continues to contend and compete like they did last year, wherever that falls in the standings, not 100% sure. So we're both going over slightly.
And I don't love
see where we fall.
You know what? Here's what I feel very comfortable saying. I think DC United will be playing meaningful games to them in September,
which is a win.
That's where I feel. That's where I feel. That's where like the points, the standings. I just think that they're going to have something to play for sometime in September.
Yeah, as long as that E doesn't go next to the name too early, yes. I think it's a positive season. As long as you come out of this year feeling like there is an idea and a platform into the following season, that's what DC's looking for right now. If you want to follow it and you don't already, go listen to the Pitch Pass podcast. You can get Gregory there all the time. And if you are new, welcome to Soccer Wise. We are covering MLS as well as NWSL basically 5 days a week. We are doing 30 season previews to get started because this league continues to grow and grow. Gregory, thanks for doing this. Appreciate the time.
David, awesome. Thank you for having me.